Hello and welcome back to another episode of On the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Rihanna. There are many stories within Steve Biko's story, right? And we'll be exploring some of those people after the series is done. I'm very excited about that. And today I'll start the episode with talking about the friendship between Bantu Steve Biko and Donald Woods. It is, on the face of it, an improbable friendship. Donald Woods is an English-speaking South African. He was the editor of the Daily Dispatch in the Eastern Cape. And when he first encountered Black consciousness, he was skeptical. Last week, when I spoke through the writing Steve Biko did on white liberals, that was really the article that Donald Woods was introduced to Black consciousness, and he had a problem with it. It was a kind of instinctive liberal resistance that Biko came to expect from white South Africans of goodwill. The two men met in the 1970s when Biko was already banned and confined to the King Williamstown district. He was forbidden from public gatherings, from meeting with more than one person, and unable to be quoted in the press. And yet he was still organizing, operating, still thinking, still organizing what he could. Woods came to interview him, or rather argue with him. What followed was, over years, one of the most extraordinary intellectual friendships of the apartheid era. Donald Woods later wrote about their conversations with a candor that is unusual in a political memoir. He described how Biko patiently, methodically, and without contempt dismantled the comfortable liberal position that Woods had occupied. Woods had believed in good faith that the answer to apartheid was multiracialism, that Black and white South Africans of goodwill could work together on equal terms toward a non-racial future. He had not interrogated what it meant that it was always white liberals who convened these conversations, who set their terms, who decided what equality looked like. Biko explained it to him, not angrily. Biko's interlocutors consistently remarked on his conversational warmth, his humor, his refusal to perform grievance, but with absolute clarity. He told Woods, in effect, "Your liberalism is genuine, but it is unconsciously paternalistic. You want to include us in your project of liberation, but it is not your liberation to manage. We are not a cause. We are a people, and we need to lead our own story." In Biko, Donald Wood writes, "He had a way of making you feel that your comfortable position wasn't a neutral position. It was a choice, and that if you chose comfort, you were choosing a side, whether you knew it or not." Woods did not simply accept. He argued back. And that, by all accounts, is what Biko valued about him. He did not want converts. He was looking for honest conversation, people who would push back and think hard rather than simply accept. The relationship between the two men was exactly, in the sense, an example of the kind of genuine across the divide encounter that Biko's philosophy made possible, not the false equality of liberal multiracialism, but a real meeting of minds in which both parties were changed. Woods' position as a newspaper editor gave their friendship a particular practical dimension. Biko was banned and therefore could not be quoted, but the relationship gave Woods an understanding of Black consciousness which did influence his journalism in ways that had a genuine impact. The Daily Dispatch under Woods became a paper that took Black political thought seriously, that engaged with it, reported on it, argued with it at a time when most of white South African press was either ignoring or dismissing it. And the friendship made Woods a marked man. The security police monitored his contact with Biko. His phone was tapped. His physical mail was opened. In Biko, he quotes an article written by Dr. Trudy Thomas on the character of Steve Biko, and I will now read an excerpt from that article. Steve was special. Being with him made a special occasion. Knowing him was an enriching experience. He was delightful company, full of charm, large and easy and gentle and courteous and humorous. He was always completely in command, completely self-possessed, and completely unassuming. There was, of course, no need for statement or pretense. He was so obviously the real thing. He always seemed to be in buoyant spirits and lifted yours with his. Steve was brilliant. With him, you had a remarkable sense of being in the presence of a great mind. Strangely, the word clever did not suit him. He never indulged in intellectual gymnastics for show. His mind was simply a tool to chisel out sense and truth and order. With Steve around, ideas flowed, and each was scrupulously examined in the light of objectivity. He could not be seduced by popular sentiment or emotionalism or gratuitous association. He remained maddeningly fair-minded even with his greatest opponents or under the most relentless harassment. He was invaluable in committee. If issues became obscured or irrelevances began to creep in, he would provide an instant and masterful analysis and lucidly revealed essential substance and set the proceedings on the right track towards progress again. All this adds up to a brilliant, concerned, efficient, human, and attractive person. But there's still more, much more. His greatness lay in the quality of his spirit, unstintingly and unswervingly served by his personality and his mind. Despite his towering stature, despite constant harassment and frustration, he remained the most modest and most moderate and tolerant of men. After every meeting with Steve, you wanted to go out and say to people, "Come and meet this man. Come and talk to him. You will find the right balance again. You will get the true perspective." Steve was motivated purely by the search for good and truth. There is plenty of scope for this in our South African society, grown dark and murky with hatred and greed and prejudice and overindulge insensitivity. Steve had perspective, direction, equilibrium. He had a sure center. In a mad, confused world, he remained normal and sane and good. These were his reference points, his beacons and signposts. These, and not any imported or ready-made ideology, were his policymakers. Everyone who met Steve in goodwill experienced a sort of magnetism. I attribute it to his triumphant, unassailable normality, a touch shown you were welcome to share. From that article that Trudy Thomas wrote, you really got a sense of the person that you were interacting with. If somebody wrote something like that about me, I'd be like, I've done the most. I'm done. What else is there than for someone to explain you in such a beautiful way? You could get a sense of the man. After Steve Biko was murdered, let's not be mistaken about what happened here, Donald Hood got banned. Now I want to read some of the extracts from a speech delivered to a large gathering on the campus of the University of Natal in Pietermaritzburg. If you want to read it, it is fully laid out in Biko. South Africa today is ruled by fear. The fear of the ruled and the fear of the rulers. The rulers are fearful because they are a minority, and their fear is increasingly because they perceive that the hatred of them by the majority is increasing. As always, fear breeds hatred, and hatred in turn breeds more fear. Voices of dissent are seen as voices of treachery and treason. Increasingly, moderation is being seen as extremism, and the peacemakers are being portrayed as the advocates of violence. The danger lies in actually speaking out aloud the things the people don't want to think about. The people hate such thoughts because they fear all the implications behind it. They would rather push the whole subject under into the depths of the subconscious and pretend that today's pleasant sunshine reflects the wishful reality. Steve Biko foresaw violence and bloodshed in South Africa, don't we all? He could see it looming ahead, don't we all? But to suggest that he advocated it or desired it is a despicable lie. I am aware of the physical danger involved in calling for justice in the matter of Steve Biko's death. I am also aware that beyond certain sensible precautions, nothing further can be done to minimize such danger. It is highly unpleasant to live under threat, and there cannot be the remotest possibility of turning back. But for the climate of hysteria and hatred that has created these dangers, I blame this government, and in particular Prime Minister Forster and Justice and Police Minister Kruger, as well as their lackey newspapers. They have presided over a system of detention under whose dispensation helpless people can be seized, tortured, and assaulted without ever having had access to lawyers or friends or family, access not even denied to a criminal. Yet the government can see no reason for a judicial inquiry into deaths in detention. There are several reasons. The numerous complaints of torture in detention, whether or not Mr. Forster regards these allegations as untrue, I can tell him that literally millions of South Africans believe that security police interrogations are often accompanied by torture, including torture by shocks with electrical apparatus, and including beating up and tightening of material around necks until point of near suffocation is reached. It is also believed that that point has on occasion been exceeded, hence the number of alleged hangings in detention. Mr. Kruger must either resign or be sacked for his grossly inept and callous handling of the entire matter, and let Afrikaner nationalists stop trying to find scapegoats for black unrest. The unrest is not due to agitators, it is due to apartheid. They can lock up every single alleged agitator, but lasting peace will come to South Africa only when apartheid is scrapped. After 30 years in power, you have succeeded in turning everyone against your policies. You have succeeded in turning the whole continent of Africa against you, and indeed the whole world. Is everyone out of step but you? Are all Christian churches out of step but yours? You pronounce yourself ready to fight the whole world, yet not even the majority of your own citizens will be your allies in such a fight. It is not your known courage and your sterling qualities that are in dispute. It is your racism. It is your insistence that only you can decide what is good for most of us in this country. But the country isn't your house. It is a house you share with all of us, and the rights you are entitled to exercise in it are by no standard the dominant ones. Yet nobody wants to put you out. There is nobody who disputes your right to be here. There are only multi-millions who dispute your right to be here on your terms only. These are dangerous days, and I am saying here all the things I want to say while I can say them, but these things must be said because there's no fear that can outweigh the need for them to be said. It was really calling out the government, calling out the minister of the police, and really saying this is the way you make this right. It needs to be said. There needs to be a record of what is happening and that there is a way out for all of you and that you still belong. That was very interesting because that's what Steve Biko believed too. Didn't want to chase the white people out of South Africa. He believed that they belong, but he believed that the majority needed to find their way, be better on their own. Donald Hood did not accept his banning quietly. On New Year's Day 1978, dressed as a priest and carrying a false passport, he crossed the border into Lesotho and fled South Africa with his family. He went to Britain first and then to the United States, and he began talking. He talked to newspapers, to television cameras, to the United Nations, to anyone who would listen. And in 1978, he published Biko. That's how long that book has been there. And this book would carry Steve Biko's story to millions of readers around the world. The book was and remained an extraordinary document. It is part biography, part political argument, part personal memoir of a friendship. When I called it a biography, my husband was like, that doesn't sound right. And when you read it, it's all these things that I just said. Part biography, part political argument, and really a memoir of their friendship. It includes long passages of Biko's own writings, as I've mentioned before, and his reported conversations with Woods and his wife. For many readers outside South Africa and inside, it was the first serious account they encountered of what Black consciousness actually meant, argued by the man who held it. 1987, Richard Attenborough adapted Wood's 2 books about South Africa into a film called Cry Freedom, with Kevin Kline as Donald Woods and Denzel Washington as Steve Biko. The film brought the story to tens of millions more. Whatever its artistic limitations, because it was 1987, it did something important. It put Steve Biko's face and voice on cinema screens around the world, and in a way that no government communique could erase. In an interview in 1978, Donald Woods said, I realized after his death that Steve Biko was the most important person I have ever met. I don't mean the most powerful or the most famous. I mean the person whose thinking most deserved to be known, and whose death was therefore the most deliberate and calculated act of cultural murder I can imagine. By the early 1970s, the South African security state had decided that Steve Biko was dangerous. Not dangerous in the way that an armed guerrilla is dangerous. Biko was explicitly committed to non-violence. He was dangerous because he was persuasive, articulate, because his ideas spread, because young Black South Africans who encountered Black consciousness came away transformed, thinking differently about themselves, about their situation, about their capacity to act. And a government built on the premise of Black inferiority couldn't tolerate that, could they? In March 1973, Biko received a banning order under the Suppression of Communism Act. He was 26 years old. 26. What were you doing at 26? 8 other SASO members, including Barney Patiana, were banned at the same time. Now, I've gone into detail about what a banning order would do and how they could extend it willy-nilly. We understand that it was one of apartheid's instruments because the sheer comprehensiveness of its cruelty is easy to underestimate. Okay, so Steve Biko was restricted to the King Williamstown district. He could not leave the area without written permission from the police. He could not be in the company of more than one person. He could not be quoted. He couldn't go to gatherings. He couldn't go to church. He couldn't enter any educational institution. And he couldn't do that anywhere in South Africa. The last restriction was the sharpest. Steve Biko's voice was one of the most incisive and original political voices in the country. Now he was just simply removed from public record. If a journalist quoted him, the journalist faced prosecution. If a publication printed his words, it could be banned. He was to become, as far as the public was concerned, as if he has never spoken. What the banning order could not do, and we've seen this time and time again, it doesn't stop the fire in a lot of people. He was still writing. He was still thinking. He continued to meet within the legal constraints with individuals. He continued to run the Black community programs from King Williamstown. His essays and speeches from this time, which were circulated clandestinely or published abroad, showed no diminishment whatsoever in intellectual energy or clarity. If anything, confinement sharpened his focus. He enrolled to study law at UNISA and founded the Eastern Cape branch of the Black community programs. He worked as a branch executive until an extension of his banning order at the end of 1975 prohibited him from associating with the BCP or entering its King Williamstown's offices. There were a couple of times that Biko was charged or taken into custody. So I'm going to first go through what he was from a banning order perspective, where they picked him up and said that he was, breaking it. And then we're going to go through his detentions. Biko was charged in 1974 for breaking his banning order by receiving visitors at home. He was found not guilty and acquitted. 1975, Biko was refused a passport to attend a conference of the Catholic Justice and Peace Commission in Germany. He was again charged with breaking the banning order by entering an educational institution to write his examination. This case was never concluded. 1976, he was again charged with breaking his banning order. The court discharged him. So one thing these restrictions had was an unintended effect. Biko's life in King Williamstown, with its constant police surveillance, its ludicrous restrictions, and its daily theatrical quality of state power versus one man's refusal to be diminished, became itself a kind of political argument. People came to see him. They came from across South Africa. They came from abroad, increasingly. Journalists, activists, academics, clergy. They came to the small town on the edge of the Eastern Cape, and they left transformed. The state had tried to quarantine an idea, and instead it created a pilgrimage site. The banning order was not the only way the state intervened in Biko's life. He was detained without trial on multiple occasions, and there were short arrests or interrogations. However, precise official records of each detention are fragmentary because apartheid security laws allowed detention without trial, and documentation was often incomplete or deliberately obscured. Let's look at what we know. It's important to note that the banning order itself functioned as a form of open-air imprisonment. You agree with me? From 1973 to 1976, there was a series of detentions under security laws during his banning order or period. He was detained at least 4 times by the security police. One of the clearly documented detentions was in 1974. He was held under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act, the provision that allowed the security police to hold a person incommunicado without access to a lawyer for an indefinite period of time. After spending 101 days at Fort Glamorgan Prison Maximum Security Section in East London, he was released without charge. In 1976, in the wake of the Soweto uprising, he was detained again. In March 1977, he was charged with defeating the ends of justice and was detained again at Fort Glamorgan and acquitted. In July 1977, Biko was accused of inciting school children. He was acquitted again. During the period before the last detention, he was never successfully convicted in a major trial. Each time he was released without charge. Each detention, though, was a message. We are watching. We can reach you at any time. We are not finished with you. In Biko, Donald Wood writes, he believed I was immune to such punishment because of my whiteness and what he regarded as my national prominence as a journalist. He also believed that he himself would not be physically manhandled if he was detained because they haven't beaten me up on previous occasions. He thought the security police were aware of his political significance among blacks and wouldn't try any rough stuff on him because of that. And he also believed that my articles about him, which on grounds of genuine modesty he had more than one time tried to discourage me from writing, provided a measure of protection for him. He was wrong on all these counts. Another reason why he thought he was safe from torture in detention was that he believed the security police knew he wasn't an extremist or an advocate of violence, nor indulging in any serious subversion. When I asked whether he thought such niceties of logic counted with the security police. He replied that the regime still appeared to show occasional vestigial regard for what was left of law. They're not completely fascist yet, he said. Interesting conversation. So that says that Biko was aware what they were trying to do, but he believed that they wouldn't go too far. But he knew he was in danger, and yet he continued. This is not simply courage in the heroic sense, though it was certainly that. It was a philosophical consistency. If you genuinely believed that psychological liberation requires refusing to be intimidated into passivity, then continuing to act in the face of intimidation is not merely brave, it's logically necessary. It's built in to what you believe. So I spoke about during the June the 16th series of episodes, I spoke about the Free Limo marches. These rallies were held by the Black People's Convention and the South African Students Association in support of the independence struggle. This led to multiple bannings and numerous detentions and the charging of 9 SASO BPC members under the Terrorism Act. In May 1979, Biko was called to testify at trial. The defense took the line that blacks needed no inculcation of resentment against white racism, that such resentment was already widespread amongst blacks. That even within the country's statutory curbs on black anti-apartheid expression, blacks had the right to mobilize opinion to seek peaceful address of their grievances, and that black consciousness was a constructive rather than destructive philosophy. Since the accused were all disciples of the philosophy, and since Steve Biko was the foremost proponent of it, he was summoned by the defense team to give evidence on their behalf. The whole transcript in the book Biko that you can go and read about the back and forth with the prosecutor and with the defense and sometimes the judge. They talk about what black consciousness means. They talk about being in Noosa's, leaving it, creating SASO, beginning of the Black Consciousness movement. All of those things are really unpacked in quite a lot of detail during that cross-examination, which is hard to get through, but the answers he gives are so well put together. But what's important is that this is one of the few occasions where they permitted him to speak in public, right? And they gave him an opportunity to articulate black leadership in the struggle in liberation. There's one part that made me laugh. The judge goes, "But now why do you refer to you people as blacks? Why not brown people? I mean, you people are more brown than black." Biko, in the same way as I think white people are more pink than white. That made me laugh out loud when I read it. Classic. The cross-examination gave him the stage to speak his ideas and beliefs into record. And where have we seen this before? With the Rivonia trial, when Nelson Mandela spoke. During the evidence, he also said, "Black thinks that everything good is white. This attitude comes from childhood. When we go to school, our school is not the same as the white school. Our homes are different. The streets are different. So you begin to feel that there is something incomplete about being black. And that completeness goes with being white." The accused were all found guilty and sentenced to 5 years imprisonment for promoting anti-white feelings, shame, encouraging racial hostility, and preparing for violent revolution. The trial turned out to be the last time Biko spoke in public. So a trigger warning. I am now going to go through his last arrest, his detention, and his death. So you can skip past this part if you don't want to listen to it, if it's too much. Okay. I want to start this recount with a quote from Steve Biko himself. "You are either alive and proud, or you are dead. And when you are dead, you can't care anyway, and your method of death can itself be a politicizing thing." On the night of the 18th of August, 1977, Biko was traveling in a car with Peter Jones, a fellow activist, in the vicinity of Grahamstown. They were stopped at a police roadblock. Biko was supposed to be confined to King Williamstown, was outside his banning area. He was arrested. In the book Biko, Donald Woods speaks to Peter Jones 9 years after Biko's death. Peter was held for 533 days without trial after this night that they were arrested, and he was finally released in February 1979. Peter Jones recalls, Biko and I were taken to the charge office after being allowed to relieve ourselves in the toilet, and we both stood around for some time. After a while, Oosterhuizen entered to tell us he was detaining us for the night. Biko wanted to know what the charge was. Oosterhuizen laughed and retorted that obviously Biko had contravened his restriction order. I then asked Oosterhuizen on what charge he was holding me. He tramped around for a short while, scratched his chin, and told the black sergeant, "Skryf maar net pamflette." Just write pamphlets. We were told to hand over all valuables or anything else we had on us for safekeeping. Then Biko and I were taken to the cells and locked up for the night. At no stage that evening was there any struggle or any attempt to struggle on the part of Biko and I. Not even when Biko asked Oosterhuizen the favor of allowing us to smoke in the cells, which was refused. In the cell, we didn't talk much. I was very tired after the long drive and lack of sleep the past 2 days. Early the next morning, the cell was unlocked and we were ordered outside towards the place where our car was parked. There were about 10 security police inside and outside the car, carrying out a thorough search. All the contents were on the ground next to the car, and one officer was going through them. Except for these items, there was nothing else in the car. After the search was completed, Biko and I were taken to the charge office again for the third time. Our coats and jackets were removed and, together with other personal items, as well as the stuff we were given receipts for the previous night, were put into the trunk of a police car that had drawn up in front of the charge office door. We were then viciously handcuffed with our hands behind us and amid our protestations forced into the back of the car. 2 security police officers got into the front and we drove very fast and at discomfort to Biko and myself towards Port Elizabeth. On our arrival at Port Elizabeth, we were taken to the 6th floor of the Sanlam building to a little room with bars on the windows and roughly handcuffed with one hand to the bars. We spent what seemed like hours just standing there, while scores of security police tramped in and out of the room to gape and laugh and pass morbid remarks to us. Major Fisher came into the room to show us 2 warrants for the detention of Biko and I under Section 6 of the Terrorism Act. Biko and I were then taken down to the ground floor with a host of security police escorting us. Here we were separated by 2 squads of police who surrounded each of us and were taken to the police car park near the Sanlam building. I was in front and Steve a few paces behind me. My entourage stopped at a combi, a van, and I was told to enter and lie face down on the floor between the seats. I turned to look at Steve, who had just passed us, and called my name out loud. He stopped to look at me and called my name, and we stared, smiling a greeting, which was interrupted when I was slapped violently into the combi. This was the last time I was to see my close comrade ever, alive or dead. Biko had no access to a lawyer and now separated from his friend. No notification to his family. Incommunicado in the custody of the security police. Dangerous place to be. But he had been in this situation before and came out the other side. He would not come out of this one. The interrogation of Steve Biko was carried out by the team, which included Major Harold Snyman, warrant officers Ruben Marks, Johannes Binneker, and Gideon Nivot. The interrogation focused officially on Biko's alleged involvement in preparing pamphlets connected to the Black People's Convention and the ongoing unrest that had followed the Soweto uprising of the previous year. The following timeline comes from the Apartheid Museum remembrance of the 30-year anniversary of Biko's death and some other texts. On or around the 6th of September 1977, the exact date and precise circumstances remain bitterly contested. Steve Biko suffered a catastrophic head injury. The brain damage was severe. He lost consciousness. He was, by any medical definition, in urgent need of hospital care. Here's where the medical profession enters the story, and it does not enter it well or do anything for its reputation from here on in. The Port Elizabeth Security Branch had a district surgeon on call, Dr. Ivor Lang, on the 7th of September, the day after the critical injury. With Hussein in attendance, Lang examines Biko while he is lying on a mat and manacled to a metal grill. He found a man who was vague and unresponsive, who could not walk properly, and who showed unmistakable signs of serious neurological damage. Lang finds a swollen laceration on the upper lip, bruise over the sternum, ring mark against each wrist, swelling of hands, feet, and ankles. Lang does not ask Biko how he obtained his injuries. Hussein asks Lang for a medical certificate. On this he writes, I found no evidence of abnormality or pathology on the patient. On the 8th of September, Lang is summoned again. Voices concern that Biko has not urinated in the previous 24 hours and has refused to eat. Lang examines Biko in the presence of Dr. Benjamin Tucker, the chief district surgeon. Tucker observes a possible extensor plantar reflex, a sign of brain damage. Biko complains of a vague pain in his head and back. Tucker does not ask Biko how he obtained his cut lip, but does ask Biko if he has any complaints. Tucker and Lang ask Dr. Colin Hirsch, a specialist neurologist in private practice, to examine Biko at Sydenham Prison Hospital. On the 9th of September, Hirsch finds the patient exhibiting a speech defect, left side weakness, and extensor plantar reflex, brain injury. Biko also exhibits strange movements, finds it difficult to turn over in bed, and walks with a left-sided limp. Hirsch performs a lumbar puncture, which reveals blood in the cerebrospinal fluid, indicating either a brain injury or the piercing of a blood vessel during the procedure. In his report, Hirsch does not include specific reference to his suspicion of brain injury. However, he reveals this to Hussein. He suggests that Biko sees a neurosurgeon, but he does not begin treatment. Lang visits but does not examine Biko. A warder tells him that Biko has eaten and that he was found in a bath fully clothed. Lang informs Tucker that Hirsch had detected an abnormal plantar reflex. Tucker feels this is a sign of brain damage, but does not act as if feel that Biko is Lang's patient. On the 10th of September, Dr. R. Keeley, a neurosurgeon, is consulted via telephone. Keeley also suggests brain damage and advises Lang to keep Biko under close observation. Lang examines Biko. In the final entry in the medical records at Sydenham Prison Hospital, Lang writes, no change in condition. Have informed Biko that Dr. Hirsch and myself found no pathology, that the lumbar puncture was normal, and as a result, I am returning him to the prison cells. In the police station, Biko is lying on a mat on the cement floor of a cell. On the 11th of September, Hussein calls Tucker to the police station. The police warden finds Biko collapsed, glassy-eyed, hyperventilating, and frothing at the mouth. Tucker conducts a 5-minute examination and concludes that there is no change. Tucker suggests that Biko be transferred to the provincial hospital in Port Elizabeth. Hussein refuses. Tucker gives permission for the police to transfer Biko by motor vehicle to Pretoria, 700 kilometers away. Tucker speaks to Lang, but neither of them sends a summary of Biko's condition or his charts to Pretoria. In the only moment of some semblance of humanity, and I mean some, because it's like this much, Tucker asks that Biko be given a soft mat to lie on during the journey, but does not verify that it is done. The semi-comatose patient, naked and handcuffed, is placed on some cell mats on the floor of a Land Rover and driven to Pretoria Central Prison. Biko is unaccompanied by medical personnel during the journey. Let that image sink in for a moment. 700 kilometers, naked, chained, brain damaged, in the back of a Land Rover on a mat because the security police did not want to deal with the consequences of what they had done in a local hospital where questions would be asked. Steve Biko arrived at Pretoria Central Prison in critical condition. Biko is examined by District Surgeon Dr. A. Funsell. He does not have any information about the patient other than he is refusing to eat. Funsell gives Biko an intravenous drip and a vitamin injection. On the 12th of September, 1977, Steve Biko dies alone and unattended, lying on a mat on a stone floor. He was 30 years old. George Bezos said, "He died a brave man. He died as he lived, with his humanity intact and the state's brutality exposed. But he should not have died at all." Don't we all agree? I'm going to end this episode with reading of text from Dr. Trudy Thomas and Donald Woods after Biko's death to just try and convey the utter sadness of him being taken so young. I did think of him as indestructible. As it happens, I was wrong about his body. I had obviously attributed to it the same qualities as his transcendent spirit. It lives on, setting alight thousands of hearts and minds. May it purify them and strengthen them and light up the right path and lead them to the just and peaceful land he wanted, with a fair share for every citizen. We speak so very nicely about Steve Biko, doesn't she? This was Donald Hood's article in response to Steve Biko's death. I just received news that my friend Steve Biko has died in detention. He needs no tributes from me, but I have the need to record a deep sense of loss at the death of this extraordinary man, who at the age of 30 had acquired such a towering stature in the minds and hearts of young Black people throughout South Africa. In the 3 years I knew him, my conviction grew that he was the most important political leader and certainly the greatest man I ever had the privilege to know. Wisdom, humor, compassion, intellect. He had all these attributes. You could take the most complex problem to him, and in 1 or 2 sentences, he would strike to the core of the matter and provide the obvious solution. How I wish I could publish for all white South Africans his thoughts about their fears, prejudices, and timidities, and what he saw as the clear answers to these. But the government, through its banning orders, silenced all his public statements. Even in death, he may not lawfully be quoted. He was imprisoned without trial more than once, experiencing solitary confinement several times. He always came out of such ordeals as tough as ever and as humorous about the interrogation sessions. He had a close understanding of interrogators' fears and motivations, and with almost total recall, could recount their questions, some of which seemed incredible. Any context of wits between him and them was a one-sided mismatch. The only thing that could bring him down was death, and now it had done so. As to his death, there are enough basic facts known to apportion blame. The basic facts are that when he was detained about 3 weeks ago, he was fit and healthy, that he was imprisoned without trial, and that he was in the custody of the security police throughout until his death. Therefore, whatever the cause of his death, I repeat, whatever the cause, I hold responsible all those associated with his detention, because his death occurred while he was under their control. And control exercised through moral wrong powers is morally unjustifiable control, making those who exercise it accountable for all that occurs in terms of it. And because Minister J.T. Kruger heads the department that exercises such powers. I hold him particularly accountable in this tragedy. As to those more directly involved in the interrogations to which he was subjected, all things humanly possible will be done to bring their role to light. Since the death of Steve Biko was announced, I have received gloating messages from white racists who rejoice in his death and believe it will aid their cause. They don't realize to what extent his moderation was preserving the brittle peace in this country. Now they quote me Old Testament scriptures, linking my grief to the creed of retribution. One might, in the same vein, remind them of an appropriate reply from the New Testament. Weep not for me, but for yourselves and for your children. And that concludes today's episode. Not happiness. It's hard to read and it's hard to retell such an unnecessary death. The murder of a man who was all about non-violence, all about making yourself better. And because they feared him and they feared that, they did this. They murdered him. And while his murder and the subsequent clown show, which we will get into next week, happened, it's really, really important to not forget the teachings, the philosophy, and the life of this man that at 30 years old, such a short life, had such a massive impact. His words today still carry weight. So come back next week where we will talk about and talk through the funeral, the inquest, the injustice of it all, and the legacy left behind by this community man. Thank you. Bye.